take your seats, make yourselves comfortable. Let's lock down those doors and let's get rolling. Hope everybody's managed to grab some tea or coffee or water or whatever it is that you need to keep yourselves going. And good afternoon to everybody. It's a very great pleasure to chair this next session. My name's Jane Lewis. I have the immense pleasure and privilege of working at the Centre for Evidence and Implementation. I'm the Managing Director in the UK and lead our lovely working team there. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're on today and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And it is an enormous pleasure to introduce Professor Nick Sevdalis for the first of our closing keynotes. Nick is the visiting professor and academic co-director at the Centre for Behavioural and Implementation Science Interventions, which somebody had the great brainwave of reducing to the acronym of BISI. It's based at the Yong School of Medicine at the National University of Singapore, and you'll probably have figured by now that BISI are co-hosts of the conference. And before joining BISI, Nick worked in London, and his work has been all about improving population health and improving healthcare systems through the application of psychology and behavioural science. He's published over 400 articles as well as contributing to loads of guidelines. And I could read out more of a litany of just quite how brilliant Nick is. But I'll just cut to the chase by saying that he is a really brainy man. I would say that he's got a brain the size of Western Australia. He's also a fabulous collaborator. He really gets partnerships and networking as a way of working. And his work is all about applying science in real-world contexts, and he brings a fantastic passion and a fantastic energy to all of his work. So it's a huge pleasure to have you here, Nick. Thank you very much indeed.
Excellent, Jane. Thank you so much. That's a most kind introduction. And of course, thank you to everyone for being here. This is a very busy plenary, so you guys are hanging in there after a very long, very exciting day. Thank you to the organizers. I can assure you I didn't sort of plant my name onto the program. We're delighted this is the first sort of global event that our research center is co-hosting. What an immense pleasure and privilege is to be doing so jointly with Monash and the CEI. So essentially what I thought I'd do today, something I haven't done. This is a lecture that I haven't given before. It's a talk rather than a lecture. And although we didn't brief as a team, is pretty much picking up from where our two morning plenaries left us thinking. So it's a very reflective, I'd like to think, you'll tell me in about half an hour, talk. I think I got a chance to do so because it sort of caught me between places, between continents and between lives. Following 23 years of my life in London, I moved to Singapore 6 months ago, almost to the day, to take on the fantastic opportunity of heading up BISI. And in doing so, once you start something new, like what do I want to do more of and what do I want to do less of, and where is the science at this point in time, and where might one to take it in the future. So this is really what I was thinking, preparing this. And then I came in this morning and we've heard from Vivian thinking about where the world is going and how this is impacting what we do. And then hearing from Bianca the state of the science. And not only am I continuing, I think, on this sort of reflective mode, but I'm also going to continue wearing the grumpy pants that Bianca was talking about this morning. It's going to be a grumpy start and we're going to end on a high, I hope. We'll find out. But essentially, you can see the grumpiness in the title. I started off being very, very grumpy. I could say use of theory, but I had to put misuse in there. So it is essentially, think of this as Bianca did the breadth, and I will go into a deep dive in one or two of the slides that she presented, which of course are about the big T, theory. So I'm a psychologist. I trained as an experimental psychologist. I was doing stuff in the lab for a fairly long time. I quite enjoyed that. And then I thought I'll translate that into something a bit different. And for the last 19 years, I've been working in medicine, departments of medicine, faculty of medicine, colleagues in medicine. None of what I thought would happen actually has happened in those 19 years, but it's been enormously fun. But I do remember Psychology 101, first day, you learn some basic behaviorism going back a couple of centuries. Really good science, really, really good science. The first thing that you know, you don't have to be a trained psychologist to know this, is that usually the way we, if you're a behaviorist, at least you think that, what we do, our behavior is driven by some external or sometimes internal stimuli. So essentially what you do, you get a stimulus, so someone's talking to you, and you respond. Your brain's doing some stuff as you're hearing me. You might think, well, that's interesting, that's boring, I might go to sleep, I might just walk out of here, I might take a call. You have to be stimulated to show the response. You might be stimulated by the fact that you paid quite a hefty airfare to come down here. Whatever it is, you're going to have to, a stimulus will generate something, a thought, and a behavioral response. So that's Psychology 101, and we're going to use this today. For the next 2 seconds, think theory. What's in your head? Don't share it. Just keep it there. The stimulus is theory. Now let me share with you what responses I've observed in colleagues over the last 19 years. Right? Think of what you got in your head. Response number one. My God, I lost in the first 2 minutes. Okay, that didn't go down very well. Response number two, oh, great. Yeah, let's engage in a 3-hour conversation at the end of which everybody's confused. I didn't get my message across. They don't understand what I'm talking about, or they sort of got the wrong end of the stick. I've got to do it over again. Everybody's very tired. Retire to the pub for drinks, or to the bar if you're in Singapore for some wine. Or worse even, it's like, oh my God, just stop telling me what you think is going on. Come and see and observe for yourself, and I don't need the theory. Just come down and help me. Because we've got some problems. I think I know the solutions. I can't make them happen. So, you know, the guys with the least amount of attention span are the ones that react like this. Of course, I've had some great responses as well, but these are the grumpy ones. So when this happens, because when you say to me theory, I get all excited. You see my eyes go like, oh, theory, let's talk theory. And why is it that other people don't react like this? I'm such an introspective person, right? So yeah, why does everybody else not like what I like? So this is what the talk today is about. So we think about it for a moment, and again, Bianca did half my work for me, and she put that up on her slides. Let's just make sure we know what we're talking about. This is what theory is. I didn't come up with this. This is in dictionary. And for the purposes of the next 30 minutes or so, let's use theory, framework, model in more or less synonymous manner. I know they're not the same, but let's treat them as the sort of theoretical constructions that people like us humans use to understand the world, and we make them explicit. We put them on papers, on graphs and diagrams, but they're there to help us structure empirical observation. So things that we observe and we think we understand in a particular manner. Now, there's this very clever guy that over the space of 2 centuries did some phenomenal work, advanced a lot of psychological science, which we now call different names, from environmental psychology to measurement, all sorts of other things. And one of the things that is attributed to him, and that's verbatim, I don't know whether it's his or not, you can't trace it anymore, is that there's nothing as practical as a good theory. And for God's sake, in a field as applied as implementation science is, this should be like music to our ears, right? But of course it isn't, but it should be, Nick thinks, because if you use theory, first of all, it saves you an enormous amount of time, because hundreds or thousands of people and millions of work hours and millions and billions in funding have gone into producing the data and the science and the theoretical constructions that I'm suggesting that we all use, and others have done that, so you don't have to do it. So you can use the theory to get a head start, and you can use the theory to develop and organize your learning. So we can all talk to each other because we sort of hang things onto theoretical constructs. I was in the two healthcare implementation sessions earlier, and that's exactly what was going on. But also, you can share the learning. So I can do some stuff in Singapore, you can do them in Melbourne. My colleagues from London, some of whom are here, delighted to see them. They can do that there, and we can compare and contrast because we've got a language to speak and constructs, concepts to think that we all share, what we perhaps we should. Why is that not so obvious? And I keep going to go like, well, why is that not so obvious to people? And then you take a step back, and this is where the sort of life happens, and it gives you a bit of thinking space. This was the view I had from my bedroom when I lived in South London on days when the temperature was pretty much like the temperature in this room today. And in the rest of the conference hall. So this is me looking out, facing east, I think. Now, if you have a garden, if you live in England, it doesn't matter whether you've got green fingers or not, you're going to do something with your garden because it's fairly expensive to try and pay a gardener to cut the grass all the time, and I can't find one to do that anyway, especially after Brexit. So what you do every week or two, or, you know, depends on how keen you are, you go to a garden centre. This is my garden centre in Woodcote, lovely place. Spend hours and hours in there. And as you go in and you pretend you're a sort of, you know, someone who knows what to do with their hands other than write papers, you come across all sorts of shears. And you look at them for like 5 minutes and 10 minutes. You look at them in awe, and I'm like, my God. I have no clue to this day. I have no clue what all these are for. I've only ever used one, which I sort of remember is the one that my grandma used when we used to have a garden when I was growing up. And I actually had that. And I'll buy that pair, and I'll pretty much use that. So when that broke, I bought the exact same one. Although I had a choice of not that many, I had so many more. And then you think, let's think about my job. I talk to all these people about theory, but theory what? Look around. University of Washington, brilliant website, which I checked yesterday. They've got a whole website dedicated to picking a theory. How do you select a theory? And you're like, well, how hard is to select a theory, for God's sake? After all these years, we've got quite a bit of theory, but we may have quite a lot of it, so much so that a website is not enough. Some great colleagues have developed a really, really nice tool to help you select a theory. So when we used to run implementation masterclasses in London, we did workshops on how you use this to select a theory, and I had people who absolutely loved them. I was one of them. When Sarah was doing that, Sarah Birken with Per Nielsen from Sweden, other people literally walked out. I've seen that because I was in the workshop. And they said, "Guy, mate, this is too much. It's hard enough to pick a theory. Now you're asking me to use a tool to pick a theory, and I don't understand the tool. So I'm going to have to go to a workshop about the tool, and then another workshop about the theory. Sorry, I've got a job I've got patients to do tomorrow morning." And this was literally the conversation we're having in July, about 3 years ago. So much so then that some other colleagues with a great sense of humor from Oslo, and I know the senior author on this one, Signe Flottorp, who's a GP and epidemiologist, fantastic work, and she used to be one of the editors senior editors in Implementation Science, our sort of earliest journal. They wrote this paper, The Off Theory. This is really recommended reading, guys. Do download this as I speak. Read it. It's 2.5 pages. It's an editorial. They came up with a theory that's called after, these are the initials of their names. So they came up with a theory. The whole theory says that you should not use a theory. And then you get into all these logical sort of fallacies and everything else in this paper. Lovely, lovely reading. But they wrote this in response to another paper that said implementation scientists should use more theory and use it better, which is exactly the sort of thing I'm talking about today. So there is frustration around the use of theory, which I could not understand, and I'm trying to be reflective about this. And then you look at the state of affairs we're in. In the last 10 years, we've more than doubled the amount of theory that we produce. Not that we consume, that we produce. So we started off the Tabak et al. Paper, very well cited, because it went some lengths to show that we're actually using quite a few theories in the field. And should we just take a step back and consolidate, look at the step that we took, we produced another 120% additional material. So the latest review, which is a few days old, that came out of Chinese University of Hong Kong by Wang et al., found over 140 theories. And if you broaden the criteria like Sharon Strauss's group has done in Canada, you get 159 theories if you don't just look at implementation phenomena, but you look at knowledge mobilization more broadly, which is what we're doing in this conference. Oh gosh, there's a lot, right? But then perhaps the theories are sort of homogeneous in some ways, and they look sort of similar, and we can look at them and so put them in a few boxes. Then go, okay, well, let's have a look. Here's a nice one, and people. So these are theories that actually have been mentioned today. So I did a bit of editing of the slides in the last hour. These theories have been mentioned today. So that's Susan Mickey's, health psychologist in London, and her teams. These have been developed by lots and lots of individuals. So don't think it's one person that's attaching their name to them. There's lots of work that's gone into that. Essentially says that human behavior is driven mostly by three things. These are the main drivers. You've got to have the capacity or capability rather to do something, the skills, the money, the time, information, support. If you don't know that the conference is going on, you're never going to turn up, right? So you're lacking the capability, not the motivation. So in addition to capability, you've got to have the motivation, because you might know that EIS is going on, but I'm really sorry, I've got something else. That I'm going on holiday, mate, so I'm not going to go down Melbourne to spend 3 days doing this. Even if you don't do that, and you're here and you're really keen, you might not get a chance, because I'm really sorry, there's no funding for you to come. So there's no funding for you to travel. So we've got to be able to have all of that, and then you can work out what determines each one of them and how they relate and all that. Then you can spend your career developing and finessing and doing all of this. So that's one theory of human behavior at large that we use quite a lot in the field. Here's another one, the first iteration thereof, which again we're using quite a lot in the field, and is based on other theoretical concepts that were already there. That's why it's called consolidated, because it's meant to consolidate things. That was more than 10 years ago. The CIFR framework that Dam Schroeder and her team have been working on for many years, beautiful. It tells you there's 5 things that can go right or go wrong when you implement no matter what, and then you expand that to from 5 to 39, and you can start doing your barriers and drivers analysis really nicely. You're hanging things onto these constructs, and we can all speak the same language. We can all understand what we're talking about. Makes a paper perhaps more exciting when you report it. But then you've got other things like this. So, well, beautiful theory, but that looks very different, because this is sort of, it says that let's create some knowledge, and you put that in the middle of this diagram, and then it takes more of an action view as to what we should be doing with that new knowledge, that new intervention, that new program that we create in that pyramid, inverted triangle in the middle. It basically goes, well, after you create the knowledge, you apply it in an iterative manner, you monitor what happens, and then that feeds back into finessing and editing and changing your knowledge and so on. Again, if you look at the top bullet there, when they built this more than 10 years ago, again, they consolidated another 60 theories or so as to how you mobilize knowledge. You get the drift. There's so much going on, and of course, that's not enough. I was literally in a session where presenters were talking about the rapid presentations about program theory. I couldn't miss that out. So this is very specific. There's a very specific logic model which we spent a few months developing with colleagues, clinical colleagues and scientists in London and patients, that is women. So this is a logic model that supports a really large national hybrid type 3 trial, to speak the language, a cluster randomized trial where we're testing out how best to implement a care bundle that reduces the chances you're going to have a perineal tear when you give childbirth, when you're at childbirth. So we've done this, and again, it looks very different. It's at a different level of abstraction. All of these look very different, and these are about 6 of the hundreds, right, of theories or theoretical constructs that we have. And the message here is that what we fail often to communicate, we talk about theory at large, but theory from theory differs vastly. So the 2 extremes, perhaps, of this spectrum is the sort of program-type theory, which is quite specific to the programs that we're all working and developing and so on, and you go all the way to the so-called grand theory. The grand theory is a theory that purports to say something about human behavior at large and human existence, and you can have several of those, and you can have contradictory ones of those. Some of those are not very useful when you try and design and implementation interventions, but maybe they are. And in the middle of all that, what you have is what's called, rather not very imaginatively, mid-range theory, because it sits in the middle. And it has been argued that there's really 2 interesting papers at the bottom there, definitely worth a read. It has been argued that in the context of implementation phenomena, most of our theories are mid-range theories, because they're doing a good enough job. They go beyond individual programs or projects or interventions, but they do not go as high up as claiming or saying that they are saying something about human existence or organizational behavior at large and so on. So, and that's probably true. It's an opinion. I probably subscribe to it. So what do we mean by using theory, and how we use theory? Or if theory can be so different, if we've got so much of it, how do we actually put it into practice? How do we use it in studies? So we've been looking at this, and other people have as well. So you go back to this first paper by Sharon Strauss's group. Of the 159 theories that they found, they realized about 60% of those was used in a single study only. Shocking, gosh. Probably the study where the authors have sort of applied the theory, developed the theory, and then got forgotten, or no one else has ever replicated that. And what is that about? We're going to talk again about this concept that's called replication. 85% of those were used in 5 studies or fewer. So if I developed theory used in 5 studies, I'd be sort of happy, but one would argue, is that not a waste of effort? I mean, what about, there's hundreds of studies, thousands of studies out there. Why is theory not being used a bit more? In a review that we have finished the data extraction and analysis, and we're just about to submit the paper once I stop going around conferences and talking and actually do the editing of that paper. One of the lead authors, Mary, is in the audience today, and she presented earlier in an earlier session about some of what's coming out of this paper. We found studies, we reviewed studies where implementation work has taken place in Asian settings. We found about 60 studies. In those, we found 34 theories used. Now, interestingly enough, of the studies that we reviewed, just over 40% applied the theory retrospectively, usually to code some interview data. That's a typical sort of application in the studies that we found. And interestingly enough, 5%, that is 3 studies out of the 60, used a theory to prospectively identify or theorize, hypothesize by implementation strategies. So given barriers, what strategies might we use and why? Which is where I would personally submit to you the theory can be really useful and it can save you time. So theory is used in a very specific way. It seems to me the pattern is not used very much, is not used reliably, as it were, and is often used retrospectively, at least in a lot of the studies that we see in the literature. And you think about, we all have different roles. Some of my roles, I mean, I'm a professor in a university. Part of my job is to actually produce science. But as you do that, you also quality assure science production. So I'm very pleased to see that in the audience, I've seen several editors, and Bianca is definitely one of them, and I think I might have seen Rebecca, who was editing a journal up until recently, I think so, and I'm also editing a journal. I'll let you think about which one this may be, you guess. These are the 4 main journals that publish implementation studies. So one of them, and that's the one that Bianca is associated with, Implementation Research and Practice, focuses on mental and behavioral health. When you read the mission statement of the journal, there's nothing explicitly mentioned about theory. This is an observation, by the way. I'm not critiquing this yet. This is an observation. Implementation science is there because the first journal that we have since 2005, the first papers, I think, appeared in 2006. You read the mission statement, and they care about theory-based approaches. And then Implementation Science Communications, which is a sister journal that came out a few years back from this publication, also talks about theory-based studies that are sort of, you know, the journal wishes to see. And I know that. I was an editor with Implementation Science for about 9 years. So we were very keen when we had editorial meetings that we need theory-driven or theory-based papers. All very good. And then one of the recent kids on the block, Frontiers in Health Services Implementation Science section, doesn't just have one mention, but it's got 3 lines on the importance of theory for people who submit to the journal. So this particular journal cares a lot about theory, including theory of change, so program theory type of, evaluation theory driven type of work, and of course, implementation theory, development, refinement, or critique based on review of the literature. Anyone care to guess who edits the journal? Yours truly. So I wrote this. I'm very pleased I did, because I was so keen. I was like, we need some theoretical thinking. And the reason we need the thinking is because our thing is all over the place, and we need to consolidate it. So we're going to have consolidated square framework for implementation science, if it was up to me. But we do, on a serious note, need to consolidate and take a step back and see how we use all of this theory. And I think it's important when we produce the science to do more of this. And here's where we're going to start going into confession mode, because I realize, not when I do the studies, because when I do the studies, I'm not in the slow mode that Bianca was talking about this morning. I'm in a fast mode. There's no slow in medicine. I've been in a medical environment for 19 years. And the problem I'm having, this is why it was a very thoughtful presentation that Bianca gave. I can only say that now, my mid-40s, I've been a professor for about a decade now. Yes, I can go slow. My junior assistant professors and those who aspire to do that can't. You can't, otherwise you're not going to make it. It's clear, it's not gray, it's black and white. So if you don't go fast, if you don't jump on those hybrid trials, if you don't lead the implementation work package, you will fail. It's just take it from me. If you want to be in an institution that's reasonably recognized, if you want to get your stuff in journals that are reasonably recognized, you have to go fast. In going fast, you're perhaps a theory consumer at that point, or you're a theory producer, but it doesn't matter. There's a tension between those people who produce theory, and I haven't produced any grand theory, so I'm sort of sitting in the middle here. I've produced a lot of program theory, I can tell you that. And the consumers of the theory, who are often our clinical colleagues or implementation practitioners, which as a concept appears more and more in our language. And there's a tension which is fine, because you don't want the theory to go, you know, away from the fact. The theory is meant to be an explanation and the parsimonious in that explanation of empirical observation. So we need the empirical observation, we need access to data. Clinicians do that for those of us who work in health, teachers, educationalists do that for those of you who work in education, and so on and so forth in public services. But there is a but, and the but is that the tension can be destructive. Because the place I occupy is fantastic. I mean, I've had the most fun being an academic and producing research and using the research to improve a human condition. Essentially, that's actually what I'm doing for my life, with my life. But I live in a place where the culture still is a publish or perish culture. If I do not publish, I will lose my chair. Simple. I will not get the next contract. I cannot appoint, and it's not up to me. It's the university system, the committee that's going to look at what's meant to be an objective outlook and criteria applied to someone's CV. If you don't publish enough, and you go figure what enough means, in journals with high impact factor, because that counts, and don't tell me it's not fair. Yeah, of course it's not fair, life isn't, but impact factor is there because people like a simple number. And if you don't get enough grants with enough overhead, you're not going to get ahead. So there is a system that pressurizes and makes us fast. So you've got to do that. If you do this, you end up with a problem that we've been having in the social and behavioral science for the last 20 years. All science has it. All these massive scandals with the so-called replication crisis, we fail to replicate our findings. So experiments done in psychology, experiments done in neuroscience, experiments done perhaps in organizational behavior, they don't get replicated. I publish something no one ever replicates. And there's at least two reasons. One, no one ever tries, because no one's going to make a career out of replications. Replications don't matter. Everybody wants the new. No big journal will publish a replication of a study that I did in London, in Singapore. No one will publish it in their right minds. Why? Because they want extravagant, novel findings. They want something that's going to shake the boat a bit. So replication isn't valued, unfortunately. That means no one does it. And when you do it, the problem is you don't replicate. Because we can't. Our methodologies are such, we don't really take into account the context, we don't do this, we don't do that. The reality is there is a massive replication crisis, and not even talking about fraud, because we do that too. There's some big cases going on at the moment. If you go on Retraction Watch, really nice website, you'll see how many papers get retracted from behavioral and psychological sciences. It's shocking. But we don't really talk about this. But the problem exists. So in this culture, we try and produce useful science. And I would propose to you that if we do that, we're actually doing everybody a disservice. This is why we're drowning. One of the reasons we're drowning in theory is because people built their careers on developing a theory that no one else ever cares about, because they need to develop their own theory to build their career. That's why we've got about 200 theories. I get you. We're going to get to 200 the next 5 years. We've got the journals need to produce. We've got the academics need to produce. And then we've got the consumers who look at all of us and go, guys, can you please slow down and explain why on earth your theory is about 99.7% similar to the ones we're using before, but you call everything different names. And you don't talk to each other, because we're doing implementation science, not knowledge mobilization. Therefore, the journals are different, and the theories look different, and the language is different. So hence a bit of confusion, which we, sitting in an academic scientific environment, we need to take this on, slow it down when we can, and think about how we can consolidate some of this and make it more useful. So some of you may have seen this. This was presented to me when I was still a graduate student. Does this ring any bells? Looking at toothbrush and theory? Some of you do, and some of you doesn't. For some of you doesn't, but it will do as of now. This was said in the context of a seminar, and I was like, what the hell are they talking about? And it's so true. It's so true. Give me your toothbrush any day, like any day. A random toothbrush, put them all in a pile here. I will pick a random toothbrush. I will not pick a random theory if it's not mine. It has to be mine. It has to be mine. Otherwise, my boss will not give me the next job. I'm not going to get the next grant. That's not too far from the truth. And that's the problem. And if you're not in an academic setting, you don't see that, but that's what many of us experience. So you've got to be aware of our inner context being that. And then we try and not do this. So let's not despair. The final slide is where we turn all of this around and say, this is me taking a step back because I can. Because I've got a lot of grey hair now, or enough grey hair to be able to do this safely and protect my team in doing so, and go and do those implementation studies at the back of a clinical trial, because I think we can do some implementation. Might not be the best study ever, but I can take the hit if that doesn't go anywhere. My team can't. I need to protect and develop the members of my team so they can sort of develop better science than the one I'm able to do or have been able to do so far, so we can advance the field. But in doing so, we still need to use, I propose to you, theory because we do stand on the shoulders of giants, and this is not a joke. Here's a giant, of course not a scientific giant, but he's a giant for humanity. And he hit the nail on the head when he said that essentially our brain, he said that far earlier than any neuropsychologist sort of looked at this, our brain sees causality everywhere. That's how we evolved. That's how we're not being eaten by anything that was out there, especially in this country, 50,000 years ago or earlier, because we see causal associations. We make causal associations all the time. You don't need to do it. You don't have to do it. It happens. Your brain's hardwired to see causality, and that helps because that means that your brain produces theory all the time. Even when you think you're not doing it, there's no chance you're not doing it. You're just not articulating it. And this is the conversation I usually have with my clinical colleagues. You say you don't want the theory, but tell me why how you think this intervention works. And as they speak, I draw a logic model. And I'm like, that's your theory. And this theory seems like a behavior changer. Have you heard of this? And this is how we bring theory into our studies. Quite literally, this is how we do it. Because when people talk, I can hear the theory. I can see the boxes and arrows. By the way, if you don't put boxes and arrows, you haven't got no theory. So boxes and arrows. And as you talk, I can do that. I mean, I've trained myself to do that, and I can do it pretty quickly. And it helps because people realize they're using theory. That's step number one. So we now can have a conversation. So that's a good thing. But we need to do more and more and more of what Bianca said. We need to do this effortfully, consciously, and with intent. So we don't just produce theory because, a journal editor like him wants to see a theory-driven paper that just used Cipher to code some interviews. Yes, and that's better than not doing this and doing some crap job in coding, because I've seen that too. But on the other hand, you don't need to do that. You can do a brilliant qualitative piece of work, and that will inform implementation, will help us understand implementation phenomena, and that's absolutely fine. If you're using a theory, do so thoughtfully. That's the appeal, and I think we can. We've got some great examples in this conference where this is being done and it's being shared. We also got some really good examples of collaborative effort. The people who use the theory, the people who produce the theory need not be the same. They will not be the same. We work in different fields. I don't have patience. I have time to produce theory. I'm paid to produce theory, refine theory, apply theory to try and improve the human condition. That's my job. I'm not operating on patients. I'm not seeing patients in the ED. That's absolutely fine. I'm not teaching kids. I'm not making decisions about sentencing or not. But I'm trying to help understand how this happens in order to improve it. There's a space for this, but we need to do more collaborative work. And we can. We need some of these sort of lighthouse places, more of the centers that do this work, because we need to learn each other's language. I don't expect, I spent 20 to 10 years in the Department of Surgery. I'm not a surgeon, but I understand what they're talking about. And they did understand what I was talking about while I was there. It's probably long forgotten now. But the whole point is we need multidisciplinary work, and it's absolutely fine. We need the time to build that relationship, talk each other's language, and enjoy doing this. This is fun. This can be productive. It takes time. It takes effort. And therefore, the slowdown is this is the effortful, thoughtful process that I'm calling for. We've got some fantastic examples, and I couldn't end on a more positive note in this conference. This is an absolutely fantastic program. We saw yesterday, we did a workshop with sort of some fresh ideas that are going to translate into implementation research projects in the coming years. Fantastic work that I had the privilege with my colleagues of being in a room and hearing more about this. So really looking forward to seeing those projects happening. So we're in I think we're a juvenile science, perhaps, as we've heard this morning, and I totally subscribe to that, but we're growing, and we're growing up. And I hope that we can do that a bit more consciously, a bit more effortfully. With this thought, I leave you. Thanks very much for the chance to give a talk and share all this. There should be a couple of mics, and please do use them because we have people online, so we need to make sure that all this is heard and recorded. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just snuggle up with you while... Oh, thanks, Robin. Brilliant. Thank you so much. So do you see what I mean? That was pretty good stuff, wasn't it? Nick, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. I really loved the tour through Nick's brain and Nick's garden and Nick's life. I was kind of waiting to see Nick's DIY shop and Nick's fridge and Nick's sock drawer and get more of a sense of it. But that was absolutely brilliant, Nick. That was superb. Thank you very much indeed. We don't have any questions online yet, so people listening and watching online, please do put your questions forward. I've got a tablet right in front of me, and I'll come to you as soon as we have any online questions. But meanwhile, are there questions from folks in the room? imagine people need a little bit of time to kind of digest
No, they're just all going to
everything
sleep.
that they've been hearing.
I think there's a late.
Hi Nick, Melissa Martin. I lead program evaluation for the Melbourne Genomics Health Alliance. I'm a researcher at the Murdoch Institute. I loved your comment about asking the clinician, well, how do you think it's going to work? And then sketching out the theory of change. I can totally relate to that. I'd love for you to comment on the ways in which you can then encourage them to reflect on that theory of change and whether things are unfolding in the way that they anticipate, and revise that theory of change so that we actually learn about what works.
Yeah, and that's a great comment. So one of the things that we've done, although not totally systematically, in groups that we've worked together, is that we produce a theory of change at the beginning of a project and then another one at the end. And we've sort of decided that unless we absolutely need to, we will publish with, say, in the context of a trial, because this is where normally we do that. We will publish in a trial protocol our original theory of change. And when we come to the end of the study, it's usually 2 to 3 years later, we'll publish the revised theory of change to show what the outcome was and whether we've got what the changes were compared to what we thought might work to what actually sort of worked. So this is certainly something we do in the context of those larger studies. And for me, these larger studies tend to be clinical trials. So it's something that people like because they see the value in the sort of the data informing. I mean, the concept of evidence base has sort of cut across, I think, a lot of these professions for several decades now. So the fact that you change your mind based on the data is something that we can work with. Doing so in a formal manner is perhaps a novelty for some people, but once they've understood what that's there for, there's good buy-in my experience. But that's a really good observation, the fact that these are living documents, essentially, that change in light of data.
Further questions? Excellent. Bianca, go for it.
Yes. I'm interested in your perspective on the university system. So you just described your task is to protect your team, to help your team moving forward as academics. At the same time, I increasingly experience that people criticize that system. And there's a bit of a divide. We're all kind of just following the system dynamics because we feel we can't change a thing. And at the same time, like a year ago, I was at an event where Ruth Stewart said, we should close all universities, this is hopeless, which was quite radical. But I think I'm also, to me, you irritate me a little bit with your giving into the system as it is. So I'm interested in your take on, do you see any opportunities or any doors into change, any pathways to make universities more relevant to the environment that's around them rather than just relevant to themselves?
Yeah, I know.
Good question.
How long do we have? And someone can bring in that gin, so we can have a drink and reflect on this. So, I think I agree probably with about half of what you said, Bianca, because I think there's something to be said about universities doing the so-called blue sky, I had a brilliant idea this morning type of work, and this is not the work that I enjoy or I do, but I think we need that protected space for people to do that, because you don't know 50 years from now whether someone's apparently silly idea might become the next massive thing, and not everything has to have practical application, because otherwise you just become a service delivery organization, which I don't think the university is there for. But I totally also empathize with the fact that we're not doing enough, certainly to change the system, as it were, from the inside. I think I haven't got a straight answer. I think I've made a choice that I'm going to be in a medical environment, therefore you play by the rules of that inner setting, and my inner setting is very different from what it would have been had I been in a sort of behavioral science psychology department, where the type of production is different, the timelines are different, and so on. I think we can do more. One thing the universities, so I don't have the big answer, the grand answer, but I have the sort of mid-range answer, which is we need to facilitate cross-disciplinary working within the universities, where at the moment it's actually discouraged. So it has been historically easier for me to work with Robin in Melbourne and with Jane outside the university and people around the world than it was to work with someone in another faculty at the university I was at, because because we were basically discouraged, because the reason we were discouraged because we would split the credit. No one wants to split the credit or split the money, God forbid, between faculties. And it was so much easier to go on someone else's grant that was based in Melbourne because there's no conflict. How silly is that? But that's reality. So if we go beyond that, and if we take the immediate step of facilitating cross-faculty working, then you can work with someone who's an anthropologist, someone who's a medic, and someone who's a psychologist and an economist, because we need these guys. We keep talking about economics. Don't know how many economists we have in the room, hopefully enough. Work together, produce in a way that's helpful for their respective fields, and at the same time produce in the middle. So implementation science has this, the beauty of the science is that we cut across, but that's the challenge. And in fact, the challenge is quite real. So when we started trying to publish some of the work we're doing, psychology journals, donkeys years ago, they were coming back saying, that's great stuff, but it's too applied. Like, whoops. And then you send it to the clinical journals, and they go, that's great, interesting stuff, don't really understand it. It's too theoretical. And you go, and what do you do? And then luckily, that was the time when new journals like improvement science journals, safety science journals, implementation science journals came up, and there was a home. So there's a genuine difficulty, because knowledge has been produced in those single discipline sort of pathways. When you try and do multidisciplinary work, it's actually not supported systemically. So we've got an implementation problem to solve, and let's make a project out of this. We need to improve that institutional structure before we make that big sort of revolution. I don't have the revolution type answer, which I know you might be looking for, but I can't tell you where to start.
Nick, brilliant answer, and massively endorsed my decision never to work in academia. I mean, really, how mad is that?
I'm doing such a great job recruiting, guys.
So, look, I just want to go quickly to a question that we've had in online, which is a brilliant one and builds on that, which is, how can theory consumers be heard when things are not working operationally or in practice? And my assumption there is that when things are not working is when the theory that's been developed by somebody else is not working operationally or in practice. How can we build theory consumers' perspectives into theory development and theory improvement?
Oh, that's straightforward. If the data don't fit the theory, just discard the data, because the theory is sacred, right? So you don't touch the theory. So you can keep doing that, and then you amend the theory, and then the theory becomes unrecognizable. But on a more serious note, I think having data that refute one of the what's the word I'm looking for? The characteristics of a good theory is it has to be testable. So if it's not testable, then it's not submitted to sort of empirical tests. I think the world works like this. We'll let the data don't quite agree. So it's actually a great gift to have data that don't agree with the theory, because it makes us think about what is it that we need to do? How did we apply the theory? Was the theory relevant at all? Is that construct meaningful in the setting that you work, or the way you operationalize the construct, which has nothing to do with the actual theory, wasn't appropriate? So and someone said it earlier, I can't remember their name, otherwise I would definitely credit them, that we need to feed this into theory development. So when you get these massive reviews every 10 years of, here's a retrospective of REAIM, here's a retrospective of CIFR, here's a retrospective of the COMBI model, that these data sets can actually drive change in the constructs and change in the way the arrows are pointing and all the rest of it in the theory. But I think fundamentally, and that's the sort of long-winded answer, in the day-to-day running of a project, I think there's a value there that the people who are consumers of theory, apply theory, they're practitioners, they must be heard. It's not a choice. It's a value. But otherwise, we're not doing implementation research, really. We're doing, whatever we're doing. I wouldn't call it implementation. Yeah. The people doing the implementation are equal partners with the people developing theory, the patients, or the kids that go to school, or the teachers, or the people in the justice system who actually do their job, which we study and try and improve.
Yeah.
So,
Nick, that is just absolutely brilliant, and I think your passion and your commitment to making science and theory make a difference is just stupendous. Thank you so much, Nick.
well, thank you for having me. Thank you.
And we'll move swiftly on to the next session, so no need to go anywhere, folks. Don't move a muscle. Fantastic.